I'm Matthew Mugno, joined by women's ice hockey beat reporter Clever Streich, and welcome to the Neutral Zone. Now, Clever, what is there to look forward to after the holiday break? What three games are the biggest games for women's ice hockey going into the second half of the year?
I mean, it doesn't get much bigger than this Wisconsin series that's coming up as the first game I'd select. There's 0-7-1 against Wisconsin all time. They're the number 2 team in the entire country. And last year, they finally got a tie. Instead of losing to a top 3 team like Wisconsin, one that could reliably win a national championship, Kareem Schroeder was able to backstop them to a tie. If they get a win off of Wisconsin this year, kind of would remind me of Yale beating Minnesota. ECAC teams sometimes have good games against WCHA teams. It's a bit harder for them to beat teams from that conference because of just the high quality of teams like Ohio State and Wisconsin and Minnesota Duluth. But if they can take a win off there, that's huge. Frozen Fenway. I mean, for both the men's and women's side, does it get much more interesting and exciting than playing an outdoor game in an iconic venue like Fenway Park? That's a game that Cass Turner said that her players will never, ever forget. And then finally, I'd have to say the Battle of Whitney Avenue for the women's ice hockey team against Yale. That's going to be a really big matchup. January 21st, that's booked. Yale's handed Quinnipiac one of their only 2 losses this year, and that's the only league loss that they have in ECAC play. That was the one game where I felt the Bobcats looked pretty outskated, and seeing that matchup be run back a month later, considering the progress that they made, will be really fun to see. But what are the men's games that you're looking forward to? Obviously, there's that game against Harvard coming up, but what else should we have marked on the calendar?
Yeah, there's not too many games to be marked on the calendar, and I think that's what makes this season so interesting for the Bobcats. They don't have too many out-of-conference opponents. They're not playing top teams like number 5 Penn State. They're not playing any more NCHC opponents like they had played North Dakota, who at the time was number 3 in the nation in October. So the 3 biggest, they could have a date with UConn if they beat Sacred Heart University in the Connecticut Ice Tournament that will be in Hamden on January 27th and 28th. That's a big weekend because they're playing a UConn team that's ranked and a UConn team that's been itching to get into that top 5. They've been in the top 10 for quite some time, so I think that'll be a matchup to keep your eye on because that's an opponent that they'll potentially see in this tournament and may not see again. So this is a new opponent, a fresh opponent, someone you're not going to see again, but it's a top team in the country. Harvard, those have to be the biggest games because January 7th, February 3rd, and then you think about last year, they lost in Lake Placid in overtime, Matthew Coronado overtime goal.
Hey, I remember I was on the call. It was incredible. I mean, that was one of the biggest moments in Quinnipiac men's ice history. That was just a crushing loss. Dave Jankowski, 2021, 2022, Matthew Coronado, 2023, question mark. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think with a game like this, you have to think to yourself, they're playing January 7th and February 3rd, and the tournament is down the road. After February 3rd, at that point, it'll be very clear who's at the top of the conference, and it will most likely be these 2 teams unless another team comes into the picture. Clarkson, they play on February 10th. They play QU really hard. They play good defensive hockey. That's their culture, and they're looking to take a victory, on the road against Quinnipiac here in Hamden, and they were very close to doing so in their last match a few weeks back, December 3rd. They led 2-1 after the first period, and things opened up after that, but that's the first time I saw an opponent come into Hamden, besides LIU, which was early in the season, some inconsistencies. The Bobcats struggled with a few things, had to find their game, but now that the Bobcats have found their identity, Clarkson was the team that gave them the biggest push, and I expect Harvard to do the same. So Those are the matchups I would look forward to for men's ice hockey coming down the pike.
Well, it was great talking hockey with you, Mugno, as always. Thank you for tuning in to the Neutral Zone. We'll see how both the men's and women's ice hockey teams fare coming up in 2023. For Matt Mugno, I'm Clever Streich for Q30 Sports.